Good evening. Welcome. I'm delighted to see such a crowd in competition with the Bulls game. I think they're likely to have more empty seats than we have. I'm Don Levy. I'm the Vice President for Research and National Labs at the University of Chicago, and one of the hosts for tonight's event. The other two hosts are my friends and colleagues, Pierre O'Doney, who's the Director of Fermilab, and Eric Isaacs, who is the Director of Argonne National Lab. There are a couple of heroes responsible for this evening's production, and one is Lisa LaValle over here, who is Director of Communications in my office. To begin with, Lisa, the idea for this series was Lisa's idea, and she's been responsible for putting together all three of these. We had our first one a little over a year ago in the Oriental Institute on art and science, and one about 6 months after that on ethics in science, and what looks to be our most spectacular one of all. I say this at all of them, and I keep wondering what Lisa's going to do for her next act, so it's getting harder and harder, but I think this one is likely to be the most spectacular one of all. Among other things, besides putting together a wonderful program, as you witnessed out front, I hope, she really knows how to throw a party. Now, at the University of Chicago, of course, a party has to have not only food for the body, but food for the mind. And we have tonight a wonderful panel, which brings us to the second hero, who is Steve Wiesenthal, who put together this panel. Steve has an interesting job. He wears two very different hats. He is Associate Vice President and the Director of Facility Services. Wearing this hat, he's responsible for, among other things, delivering hot water to the athletic center and making sure the garbage gets taken out. And I assure you from personal experience, both of these activities are very much better run since Steve has been in charge of them.
You didn't mention shoveling snow.
When he is not taking out the garbage, he is the university architect and responsible for the rather extensive building program we're going through right now. The university had underbuilt for many years, and we're sort of catching up with this. And it was, as was mentioned during the video, one needs to do two things. You certainly need the buildings to be functional to do what they have to do, and having lived a good part of my scientific career in a building which I think originally probably was functional, but it just outlived its utility, I appreciate what a modern building can do for science. And also, and particularly in the city of Chicago, where there's a very high standard, one has to worry about the aesthetic values of the buildings and make sure they are they're appropriate for the university and appropriate for the city. And that's a very high bar around here, which I think we're achieving. If you walked over here from almost anywhere, you will have seen some of the new buildings that are going up, and I think they're quite spectacular. I should read a bit of Steve's biography, and I can't do this off the top of my head. He is the Associate Vice President for Facilities and the University Architect. You will note in the video there was a great emphasis on sustainability and utilization of limited resources, and that really has been a hallmark of Steve's leadership at this university. He initiated and implemented the university's first campus-wide environmental sustainability program. He came to Chicago in 2008 from the University of California at San Francisco, and led the design and development of their campus, their 43-acre Mission Bay research and academic campus. He also managed ongoing engineering, operations, maintenance, capital programs of the campus. I take it you took out the garbage there as well. And from 1991 to 2000, he was Associate Vice President, Architecture and Facilities Management at the University of Pennsylvania, after 6 years as an architect with the design firm of Venturi, Scott Brown and Associates. Steve earned his Master's of Liberal Arts degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and both his Bachelor of Architecture and Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from the University of Maryland. I'm very pleased that he took the effort to put together this truly spectacular panel. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well. Steve?
Thank you very much, Don, and thank you for coming here. And is anybody following the game anywhere remotely? It's fine, we'll find out later. I am thrilled to have this panel here. I was asked to say a few words at the beginning before we delve right into the questions. And I thought that in preparation for this evening that I should begin as any rigorous scientific inquiry might begin, by Googling. I Googled physics and architecture, and the number one search result out of 340,000 entries was, does one have to take physics to do architecture? Which I found particularly scary, considering that of all the arts, architecture is arguably the most rooted in the laws of science and nature, or at least maybe should be. There's an illustration, actually, if we could pull up the first. Is there somebody? Yes, thank you. So we build artistic visions that must also function, of course. They must shed weather, enclose space, house people, and there are many varied activities. This is an image of, it's called the primitive hut, and it's been described, often referred to as the first willful architectural design in the history of humankind. It's been said that for most of us, design is actually invisible until it fails. And after the recent tsunami in Japan, many are now intensely discussing the design of nuclear power plants. Or after Katrina, there was, I know, a lot of discussion about the design of levees. And really, every accident and disaster provides a brief moment for us to be truly aware of the real life and our dependency on the underlying systems of design. So I think the theme for tonight, architecture plus science equals environment, is really an equation rich with potential for discussion. First off, do we mean the science and art of producing architecture? So the next image is moving a little bit beyond the primitive hut into the Iron Age, evolving to the production of architecture now, including sophisticated engineering. Working with the forces of gravity, geophysical, and material sciences that in their essence root architecture from and to the land. Architects today are very focused, and appropriately so, on the environment, the local and global impact of designing and building. For human health and comfort, we're also, of course, much more conscious of the material and resource limitations and the energy impacts of our built environment. All of this factor into the science of producing architecture. So we could probably spend the next hour and a half talking about that. We could also be discussing the science of how people experience architecture, how we experience the already built world, which would involve perception, cognitive psychology. How does our built environment affect performance, memory, mood, just the basic fundamental qualities of life? The third slide, if we could have, could be a third theme for this evening, which would focus perhaps on architecture housing scientific endeavors. Should we be moving more aggressively to evidence-based design in labs and clinical settings? How do we create environments that are ever more conducive to those sparks of creative insight that happen either testing at the bench or in between spaces? Do we design more monastic cells, people colliders, some combination of that? Efforts are underway to bridge the disciplines of architecture and the physical and biological sciences toward outcomes measurement. John Eberhard is the founding director, I think this was about 10 years ago, of the established the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture in the American Institute of Architects. And he challenged us. He challenged us to shift away from an emphasis on solving the puzzle of designing a building to instead studying how to accommodate human activities that correlate with responses of the brain and the mind. The next slide, so it's a design, many might recognize the architect, Frank Gehry. The building is the Status Center at MIT. He launched the 2006 Society for Neuroscience annual meeting and described his process of informed intuition to 7,000 neuroscientists in Atlanta. So imagine that. We're beginning to understand the physiological processes of human interactions with space. By combining brain imaging techniques and virtual reality programs, scientists are actually now able to watch what happens in people's brains as they walk through a space then look to see how that brain activity changes as the spaces they encounter change. I love this title of a recent article in the journal Neuroscience. It's called "Building Design Can Trigger Profound Occupant Emotional Memory." So I often find myself engaged in debates here at the University of Chicago about collegiate Gothic versus modern. So next time, I think I'll bring along my MRI and settle it once and for all. We do know that neurons do connect the senses and intense memories. Have you ever listened to a song and been completely transported back? Or walked into a room that has a certain smell which instantly reminds you of an experience that you may have had a long time ago? Places do evoke emotions, recollections, people, and even ideas. There's an intimate relationship between memory and the sense of place. It was said that Marcus Cicero, 2,000 years ago, as he was delivering 2-hour speeches in the Roman Senate without notes, see, I can't do that, by constructing in his mind a palace whose rooms and furnishings he imagined roaming through them, called up ideas that he wished to discuss. So his ideas were made memorable by locating them in space. Today, we use the term architecture of computer science to refer to information stored by location and accessed by systems of coordinates. So maybe this is a question for later, is virtual memory usurping the tangible earthbound place? With the ubiquitous PDAs and iPods and iPads, have architects begun to compete or in fact even lose our attention to a parallel virtual world? If you go to the Piazza San Marco or any other great urban space, count how many people are being technologically transported elsewhere while in those spaces. So back on tangible Earth, design can very much be influenced by our understanding of the human brain. In just one example from a 2007 Dana Foundation article entitled "Architecture Meet Neuroscience," we learned that depending on the situation, ceiling height, so one detail about design, ceiling height, could benefit or impair consumer responses. When a person is in a taller, 10-foot-high ceiling space, they'll tend to think more freely and abstractly. They might process more abstract connections between objects in a room, whereas a person in a lower 8-foot ceiling height will likely focus on specifics. So does that mean that in the same space, short people would make purchasing decisions that are different from those of tall people? More seriously, in the next slide is actually a few blocks to the east, our very own Roby House by Frank Lloyd Wright. The effect of ceiling height on human psychology would have been nothing new to Frank Lloyd Wright. His use of spatial compression before expansive views very much replicate a psychology that's rooted in the origins of the human species. A cozy fire pit in a defensible cave, doesn't that sound romantic? With a grand view of the savannah, across at 58th and Woodlawn, perhaps. Architecture traditionally has relied on observation and intuition rather than the experimental method and proof. Now we're better able to explain the ways in which we perceive the world around us and navigate in space, and the way our physical environment can affect us. Architecture surrounds us almost all the time and will always involve telling stories. It's as much interpretation, narrative, as it is engineering, physics, and material sciences. So the next and last slide I have, Lou Kahn, great 20th century architect, described architecture as an expression of the human place in the world, social, economic, aesthetic, spiritual, and natural. He also referred to it as a meeting of the measurable, or light, that which is, and the unmeasurable, or silence, that which is not yet. Kahn described the transcendent intersection all around us. And I quote, "All material in nature, the mountains and the streams, and the air and we, are made of light which has been spent. And this crumpled mass, called material, casts a shadow, and the shadow belongs to the light." Goethe Goethe described architecture as frozen music. Or we could reach way back to the ancient Chinese poet Lao Tzu, describing solids as void and void as solid when matter is used to achieve a purpose. He said, translated, molding clay into a vessel, we find the utility in its hollowness. Cutting doors and windows for a house, we find the utility in its empty space. So Kant, Goethe, and Lao Tzu all evoke an alchemy of the natural world into our built environment via architecture. So in summary, before we can become more conscious of that alchemy as we produce, or not before, can we become more conscious of that as we produce and experience architecture, whether housing scientific endeavors or the vast myriad of other human activities. So I'd like to kick off questions for our panelists with one more quote from Liu Kahn, and this is what he said about working with Liu Kahn on the Salk Institute. He said, when Salk came to my office and asked me to build a laboratory, he said, there's one thing which I would like to be able to accomplish. I would like to invite Picasso to the laboratory. He was implying, of course, that in science concerned with measurement, there is this will of the least living thing to be itself. The microbe wants to be a microbe, the rose wants to be a rose, and the man wants to be a man, to express. This desire to express was sensed by Salk, that the scientists needed the presence of the unmeasurable, which is the realm of the artist. So I'd now like to have us all delve a bit deeper into these themes with our prolific, highly creative, and I dare say both measurable and at times unmeasurable panel of distinguished architects. Let me begin, Hellmut, with in a brief introduction. Hlemut Jahn's architecture has been recognized globally for design, innovation, vitality, and integrity. Born in Germany, Hlemut came to the United States for graduate studies in architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology. He is president and chief executive officer of Murphy Jahn, recipient of the 2005 AIA National Firm Award, 2006 AIA Chicago Firm Award, and most exciting for us, he has dramatically changed the face of the city and University of Chicago, and received many other awards in the process for projects across the United States, Europe, Africa, and Asia. So Hlemut, let me begin by asking, how does your understanding of renewable natural resources and your collaboration with engineers in your practice influence your designs? And I imagine we'll want to move to the next set of images.
Yeah, if we can just put the first slide on. This slide is dates back to 1998 when we were asked by Illinois Institute of Technology to respond with a two-page statement for our qualifications for participating in the competition for a new campus center. And this was the first building IIT built like in 30 or 40 years. And it was obviously marking the transition from what's after Mies. In this statement, we actually wrote that traditional materials like masonry, stone, concrete, and even steel, that they have reached a state of limited development. In the next slide, and that we advocate materials with more promising potential for further development, those with new technology, changing properties, integrating energy, and creating a new architecture. And this statement followed several years of very close cooperation, especially in the European buildings, with architects and engineers, and we phrased a word called archineering, which means down breaking the barriers which very often exist between those disciplines. There's a certain kind of rivalry, you know. So, we wanted to integrate the formal, functional, and environmental issue in an architecture which is also beautiful, drafted, and sustainable as well, and where the result of this integrated effort actually becomes the visual statement. We also were interested in developing new concepts and technologies, and naturally, these concepts were very much affected by physics and science, which those experts brought to our work. And it was like a refreshing time. It was like learning again, going to school again, finding out things where we were kind of lost just in aesthetic and formal and spatial pursuits. The goal was to make buildings more efficient in their construction and in their use, to conserve resources, make them as much recyclable and sustainable as possible. And in this process, the natural resources were, and the comfort of those buildings were maximized, and the technical equipment on these buildings is minimized. And the performance on the building was more important than the aesthetic, and they were greatly improved. In the next slide. So analyzing the solutions, we found actually out then much later that the natural resources, the natural renewal resources like light and sun, the air, the wind, the water, the soil, and their impact on shaping buildings through design, and combine those with smarter and more intelligent way to improve quality of life and the comfort in these buildings was actually the way to go. And the next one. And mostly, obviously, those results show up in facades and in roofs. I mean, we used the glass as structural material. We opened that windows so that we could have natural air. The transparency allowed us to have a great deal of daylight. You know, the language of these buildings totally blurred the boundaries where the architect started and where the engineers ended. The next one. The idea of the dynamic skin, that there are elements in a facade which change, that the building responds to the outside environment and adjusts to the inside environment which we desire. The next one. Double facades were done, and those facades could be controlled based on the conditions on the outside and the desired conditions on the inside. The building became actually was controlled by not just by the individual, but the building was controlled by a management system which made it function, you know, the right way, adjusting to wind, sun, and the next one and this required, and this resulted in elements on a building, you know, which required a high state of engineering, and the buildings actually became machines, and this continues to do so. The next one, that you know, we are working right now on facades which actually use textile, because the textile can be transparent and has obviously a much higher insulation value of the glass. In this whole process, the material values of the glass, depending on the coatings, depending on the gas which is inside the glass, the frit, the performance of these materials has so greatly been improved, you know, that we can now build very, very thin walls with the same properties like brick walls or concrete walls, even better, because we get the benefits when the sun shines, and we get the benefits when we shade the building, and this is just the beginning, and the ultimate goal is that we have as little as anything on the facade of the building. Then, and because then maybe perfection is achieved, but fortunately, development never stops. The next one. And this was extended like in the Bangkok airport into the roof, where we developed a 3-layer membrane, which not only kept the rain out, let the light in, did the room acoustics, kept the noise out, and is very light, safe structural material. The next one, and from the operable windows, we went to the operable roofs. This is the Max Ferroni headquarters in Geneva, where the main space is really a convertible space. And the next one, and this is one of the building was designed actually 5 years ago, and 6 years ago maybe, and where we manage now to do in a room which is occupied and has very strict conditions of comfort, to do as a single shell by the way that this shell is constructed, by the material is developed.
If I could interject for our visitors from Fermilab in Argonne, this is about a few blocks to the east. It's the Mansueto Library. So,
and the next one, and this is one of the Super Bowl buildings we designed in Ras Al Khaimah, which is right next to Dubai. It was 1,880 meters tall, and it was 120 meters in diameter, 300 about 80 feet, and it was mixed-use building, and it was sitting with other buildings in a large pond. And the next one, and out of this pond, which had different layers of salt, more intensity, energy could be generated. With the next one, was then could either be mixed through heat exchangers and air to create in that vertical solar chimney, which is also a structural support in the building, generate air movement, which generate water because of the hot air, and generated a significant amount of the electricity which the building used. So this is probably the closest example where we can ultimately go, and where we can, as architects, not operate without the help of people who know about the scientific and physical laws and can quantify those laws, and then can ultimately also test and judge whether, which is a big problem in this whole issue about sustainability, whether the buildings fulfill that. The next one. So the results of those things, this is the post-tower and pond, which was one of these twin shell facades, shows you that from a conventional and taking a good practice office building, that the measurements which were made a couple times after the building opened, that we reduced the energy consumption of the building by 51%. And this was done not through machines and not so many of the things you read today. This was actually done by design. This was also understanding the human, Steve talked about this, the human, what actually determines the human comfort and behavior in a building. Because it's not just what the temperature is, it's what the human body feels, and how you make the space comfortable through a system, natural or the artificial system you always need because of extreme conditions to make people comfortable. This requires always having specialists, as I said, to develop materials with improved properties, to increase the light transmission, to increase the transparency, but at the same time to decrease the heat transfer, to improve the circulation, reduce the weight, change the physical properties, minimize the maintenance, and maximize the life cycle, and also try to make these materials recyclable. And architects, engineers, scientists, physicists, constructors, and builders have to work together to achieve this. This is not my own quote, but I read in the process of thinking about this conference a quote which says that science starts where we think it ended, because the future is always far away. Thank you.
Our next panelist, Gary van Zandbergen, is an architect and project manager at the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. In his 17 years at Fermilab, he has collaborated with Fermilab scientists, researchers, engineers, architects, and staff in the development of design solutions to the varied facilities needs at Fermilab. These have included underground and above ground experimental facilities, computer facilities, and office spaces. Gary is a licensed architect with LEED accreditation. Gary, how would you say Dr. Wilson's founding architectural design principles have impacted Fermilab and its current generation of scientists and facilities?
Okay, I'll answer that. I have G1 through G4 on the slide, so we'll start with G1. By laying a little background foundation on what those founding architectural design principles were. And you'll see a quote on that. So we really started with a vision. Fermilab started with a vision. And I have these quotes from Dr. Wilson's book that he wrote entitled Starting Fermilab. His vision was that Fermilab would be a utopian place where physicists from all parts of the country and from all countries would be doing their creative thing in an ambiance of well-functioning and yet beautiful instruments, structures, and surroundings that would reflect the magnificence of their discoveries and theories. Lofty vision. I have a couple more quotes here. My fantasy of a utopian laboratory clearly required a setting of environmental beauty, of architectural grandeur, and of cultural splendor. And I've always felt that science, technology, and art are importantly connected. So the thematic the statement of tonight is science plus architecture equals environment. I think that's something he tried to embody. So we had a founding vision. We'll go to G2. By the way, before I forget, I wanted to thank Andrew Federowitz, who's there with me. Him and I worked together on this for the last couple weeks, sort of thinking through Fermilab, and we've had a good time distilling.
So, I highly recommend a visit for those who haven't.
Yeah, it's a neat place to go to. So the expression, these principles had to find some kind of expression in some sort of visible structure, visible building. And it was built on some baseline philosophies. Slide G2, which I think is that, yes, really identifies his attraction to the strength of form. And this slide shows a number of forms. A tree, for starters. The site is very flat and beautiful, full of prairie and beautiful sunsets and things like that. And this tree seems like an interesting sculptural moment. He did these rather bold concrete forms. I think Wilson Hall, the middle slide on the middle picture on the left column, is probably the most evident of that. He was inspired by the architecture of the times to some degree. That he was influenced by Beauvais Cathedral in France, actually, and also by the Ford Foundation, if any of you are familiar with the Ford Foundation building. And if you go to Fermilab, Wilson Hall, and Ford Foundation, you will see the family resemblance. But so he was very interested in these strong sculptural forms. So that's a strong feature with texture added. And I showed the site plan below, the site aerial photo. And you'll see the circle at the top is the main ring, the original accelerator. So that's a strong geometric element too. The site actually, and I think Steve noticed this when he was out there, it reads very strongly with these berms and the lines and circles of accelerators. So that's also some of the strength of the form that he was building on. And he worked with his associate, an artist in residence, Angela Gonzalez, on slide G3. The other characteristic then is color. So we have form and then we have color. And the color, as they arrived at the site, it was farmland and prairie. And I think we've lined these colors up here. You can kind of see the bottom corner of each slide is the color scheme illustrated, as does the second column on your slide. You can sort of see prairie grass, you see sky, you see the gradations of the sky as it gets darker as it goes up. You all notice that. These colors are derived from the sky, from the grass. And then there was the interaction of machines and man on this site, this farmland. And that was characterized by tractors as farmland. So they decided to translate these colors, John Deere green, Caterpillar yellow, Massey Ferguson red, International Harvester. These are actual colors of tractors. And those became part of the color scheme. That added with sort of a playful geometry, as evidenced in the third column, by the doors of service buildings. They sort of randomly selected color concepts and almost imagine that these little buildings scattered around the site were like toys, like building blocks, child's blocks, with circles on the side. And I think the circle can relate to the accelerator also. And that's epitomized in the upper right-hand corner by a functioning service building. That's not a manned building, but a machine. They also felt that the machines of the farm could almost be translated to the machines that we add, because so much of, particularly Fermilab, is big machines, big accelerators. A lot of our buildings are really not much more than machines. They're buildings that enclose machines and aren't really occupied. So the play of this color scheme onto the Fermi machines sort of gave a unity throughout time. Agriculture, farm, prairie, Fermilab, machines. So I think that was the general sense of that. So that's how they developed really the two building blocks of where the architecture is. So the environment is characterized typically by this vibrant color scheme. So the impact, to answer the question, the impact of the founding principles on Fermilab is that it has a unique identity, sense of place, and its unique design vocabulary. And that does give us something to travel through time with. However, in Dr. Wilson's writings, he realized something that I think we realize now, and that is that money spent on aesthetics may, in some people's minds, translate in money not spent on science. And to some extent, this may have caused some tension. I think there's almost a second period of Fermilab, the founding era, and then the second period, there were some deficiencies, frankly, in the buildings at the founding area. The colorful buildings, the nature of them didn't hold up well to the weather. They were leaking. And unfortunately, I think they got covered over with beige siding. And I think Angela Gonzalez and Robert Wilson would probably not be totally thrilled with that, but there was good reasons for it, practical reasons, et cetera, to do that. But in that period, it maybe has lost some of its uniqueness in that sense. And you probably noticed that in the video, a couple beige-like buildings. So, maybe that institutional value is somewhat being lost. So we go to slide 4, and the last slide, which I entitled Continuity. So our theme is vision, form, color, continuity. Given the unique environment that we have, there's a strong desire among lab leadership and others, and I think the scientists in general, that this is an important thing that we have, a design, something founded on design and architectural principles. And the current generation needs to struggle with what this means. But I think there's clearly a desire for continuity. again, they believe that something valuable exists there in terms of a design sense. We measure new designs by how they fit in with the perceived Fermilab architectural style. And I think there seems to be a tension in sort of reinvigorating this and having to answer a number of questions. And we still, of course, want, to quote Dr. Wilson again, an architecture that will represent the magnificence of science discoveries and theories. But I leave us with a couple questions that I think we don't know the answers to right now, but that we are thinking through. What does continuity actually mean? Does that mean literally that we continue to create structures based on Wilson-era designs or elements in his designs? Is that required? Or do we develop structures through the filter of the more philosophical sense of the utopian place where architecture, where science can work in an atmosphere of beauty and so on? So I leave the question that do we look at today's situation and tomorrow's situation through the lens of the many relevant changes in society in the last 35 and 40 years, not the least of which, and probably the greatest of which, is sustainability, as just described, as a core principle that really needs to drive design, not be an afterthought or an add-on, but a core central element. There, of course, have been cultural and technological changes in these 35 and 40 years. Changes in attitude on what constitutes an effective workplace, a stimulating space for scientific collaboration, and experimental facilities. And I think Steve mentioned that in the video segment, that there may be a differing sense of right now of what is the best kind of place to exchange ideas and collaborate. And again, we need to understand how that continuity would be. What vision is it based on? Is it based on the literal vision of the building or the philosophical vision of Dr. Wilson? So to quickly summarize my answer, Dr. Wilson had a vision. The vision was carried out in form, texture, color. Architecture was important. The current generation of scientists respects the vision, respects the principles as something important to build on, but the continuity and interpretation of that vision going forward is something that will need to be understood and applied. And one final quote for his generation and ours from Wilson. I thought I'd better pay close attention to the architecture of the project, for I was determined that it be significant yet affordable. My reasoning was that if we produced a dowdy site with shabby buildings, then the technical people we wanted to work with us would not come, and the statesmen who might judge us in part by appearances would not in the long run give us the funds that we would need for our physics. So I think that's where we were and where we need to go.
Great. Thank you, Gary. We might come back to that question of money not spent on aesthetics can be spent on that, and the value of that, right? Good insight there. I'm pleased to introduce Jamie Carpenter as our next panelist. Jamie studied architecture and sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design, graduated in 1972, and he then went on to exhibit light-based artworks as a consultant at Corning Glassworks, developing new glass materials aimed at architectural applications. Since establishing James Carpenter Design Associates 33 years ago, he has gained worldwide notoriety for synthesizing light into building structures. His studio is a collaborative environment, encouraging an exchange of ideas between architects, materials and structural engineers, material scientists and structural engineers, and environmental engineers and fabricators. Jamie is the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Academy of Arts and Letters Architecture Award, the American Institute of Architects Honor Award, and a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, and recently completed the renovation and expansion of the Israel Museum's Jerusalem campus. Jamie, as you design, when do your initial artistic visions become informed by scientific hypotheses? Or do you actually begin with the scientific hypothesis that you then express through art? Or,
okay, very good question. And a question I think that I will try to respond to just with a few slides that combine several different projects together. But fundamentally, I think that my interests really lie in an interest in light, which I've always had. I've never quite pinpointed why I've been so fascinated with light through my career. But I think that the work really starts with the fundamental idea of observation, observing phenomenology of light, and then very clearly trying to analyze what you're looking at, both perceptually and physically, simultaneously, and then trying to understand a way to synthesize the process or the phenomenon that one sees, and then ingrain that into the fabric of a building in some way, so that you are, in many ways, trying to share the qualities of that observation or the content of that observation with others. So it's a way I think of, the way I think of the work is really trying to re-engage people with the dynamics that occur in nature, and particularly with light, that inform our understanding of the world around us, and how one brings back a more concrete awareness of those phenomena in a more urban context. So I've put together a few images here. Maybe we could have the first one, which is up now. But I've just tried to combine a few projects which deal with some aspects of light that interest me. And then the slide you're looking at right now, on the left-hand side, is essentially just dealing with reflected light and the properties of reflected light, whereas the one on the right-hand side is about transmitted light. And for me, basically, I should just probably say that the light for me is really information. I really think of light as information, and I have some very naive concepts about light relative to the photon basically having a content. It has mass, so it must have a content to it of some sort. And for me, there's like this reading of the photon perhaps having an embedded body of information within it. So I think of light basically as an embodied photon, which is a natural photon occurring from the stars, basically coming to us, and then there's sort of a synthetic or sterile photon, which comes from artificial sources. That's just my own naive way of trying to think about light, but how one tries to elucidate those different properties of light. So in these two projects, I mean, the one on the left-hand side for you is actually the World Trade Center Tower 7, which is a building in New York, and the organizational idea of this building at the very, very beginning, conceptually, was how do you design a building that can embody and be embedded with qualities of light that are specific to that location. It's in downtown Manhattan, wonderful qualities of light in New York, a lot of moisture in the air, so light has a very physical presence. And we're looking at the base of the building here. And in working in architecture, I mean, the buildings, of course, need to have a performance element to them. In this case, it's an enclosure around a power substation. And this system that you're looking at is really a series of stainless steel prisms that are oriented in slightly different directions, so that every prism is presenting back to you a reflected image of the environment behind you. So when you look at the building, it's basically a composition of the surrounding landscape or urban landscape that is behind you. So in a way, it's sort of just giving back to you the complexity and richness of the surrounding environment. And the project on the right-hand side is quite different, but it opens up this idea that perhaps there are ways that we can construct realities that do not exist outside of a building, but are completely constructed through optics. And this is really a very simple device. I often think of our work as devices or systems, and in this case, it's a series of mirrors and lenses and sort of a very simple projection system, which this is a window that has no view. Basically, it's up against another building, literally about 3 or 4 feet away. So the mirrors operate as periscopes and basically bring sky plane images of surrounding trees, aspects of nature into the window plane, and then lenses take that information off of the mirror and project it against a diffused surface. So the principle here is just conceptually how in architecture can you construct for yourself a different environment or a different experience, and I mean, the glass and optics sort of has that ability to allow you to do that. So those are two systems working with both reflected light or transmitted light or information, let's say. And then the next slide is really looking at a more perhaps performative aspect of light, where the system on the left-hand side is a enclosure for a building. It's actually a photovoltaic system. It's a power plant for a power company down in Texas, and it is a major production system for the power company, and it's oriented at specifically late afternoon production of electricity when they have peak power requirements in this part of Texas. And it's entirely designed for that moment of the day, or those 3 or 4 hours of the day when the need for electricity is critical. But it's just suggesting that there are ways of taking advantage of photovoltaic systems, which are in and of themselves actually not particularly interesting to look at, but how do you actually begin to use systems creatively in the definition of an enclosure of a building, so it's both productive, it's both visual, and it's functioning as well as the enclosure for the building itself. And the wall on the right-hand side is really a project in New York City, which a little bit like the last project I described, it's a completely opaque wall surface, and it's built up against a brick wall or concrete block wall. And essentially there are these fins of glass that extend perpendicularly off the surface, and then they project their, let's say, shadow, but it's really a projected image of color through the transmission of light through the fin, as well as its reflected presence. So it's a wall that if you walk by it, say from north to south, the entire wall goes through a complete transformation. So you see people looking at the building from 2 different directions are actually seeing 2 very different things. And again, it's a way of how does one insert into our day-to-day environments in an urban context something which, first of all, captures your attention amidst all of the activities that are occurring around us, but more importantly, I think, how does it capture your attention and allow you to be re-engaged with phenomenon that's occurring around us all the time, but which we don't necessarily pay attention to. So there's a bit of science involved relative to the materials, certainly, but it's also purely about experience. I mean, the urban experience of someone in a city. And then on the next image, it's really talking about 2 projects that are really talking about movement and passage and threshold, how you transition through spaces. The lower project is really a very old project from the early 70s, which is essentially an installation. It's a film installation of a series of images photographed down at the surface of a river, cameras all running simultaneously, and then reprojecting those films in a museum or gallery, so that you enter into the gallery space, you're basically walking alongside a river, and you see the migration of salmon through that river. But more importantly, by changing the timing of the films, you begin to realize that the image you're looking at in the surface of the water is really the image of the sky overhead. So it's really trying to understand how the eye edits information, and I think that's critical to how I think about work. Is like, how do we tend to eliminate huge amounts of information that surround us and only focus on things that are either extremely familiar or the extraordinary, and how you can sort of elucidate those opposites and make them much more resonant in terms of our day-to-day life. And the one above that, the image in the upper part of that split image, is really a passageway at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and it's a below-ground tunnel. It's about 150 yards long, but as a way of connecting people who are below ground in this passageway, we've done several things. I mean, one is that the wall you see on the right-hand side of that passageway is diffused glass, and above it is actually a whole surface made out of cast glass, so that there is water basically running down this hillside over this passageway, and the light basically comes down 30, 40 feet below ground, and it carries with it sort of the animated quality of the movement of light and water, so that even though you are below ground that far, you have this connection to the variables of light that are occurring above you, and then simultaneously also using periscopic ideas, bringing images of the landscape down into this below ground passage, so that you pass by these courtyards, some of which are there and some of which are not there. They're simply projections of another environment above you. And then the fourth and final slide is really bringing us here to the campus for a project that is nearing completion, which of course are the bridges that go across, or the luminous walkways that go across the Midway. And I think these two images really talk about, again, this idea of movement, time, how one engages with time as we pass through the landscape or pass through buildings. How is that, those seconds or moments that we have, how do you really animate those moments so that they become more meaningful and sort of have a resonance with our experience? So the upper image is the Midway, and as you know, it was I think a very sort of bleak condition prior to the transformation here. And we really went back to thinking about Olmsted's early plan for this Midway. I mean, he envisioned this as being a canal, as many of you may know, connecting to the lake. It would have been filled with water, and he had designed a series of bridges that would have become Ellis and Woodlawn and Dorchester. They would have been bridges over that canal. So we tried to do something which in many ways sort of captures the idea of floating the roadway again above the landscape, not using water but using light, and then making the walkways much more generous relative to moving people away from the traffic and away from the cars, so that you feel more engaged with the landscape and less sort of caught up in the activities of the street itself. And then most importantly, the idea of connecting the campus together with light, which is an idea that is in play within the campus already relative to lighting the beautiful buildings around campus. And then this is really trying to use light as a way of enhancing that identity, using light as a wayfinding method, and obviously serves the purposes of safety and all of those things simultaneously. And just below that is another bridge done many, many years ago, all out of glass. But I think that it, as an ending sort of piece, I think it does here speak to this idea of movement and repose, in the sense that this is you're looking at the top view of a bridge, or you're looking down on it. So the idea of crossing the river is really moving out onto this glass platform, moving along the glass platform, which is in a way engaging you with the flow of the river itself, and then moving to the other shore of the river. So there's a moment in time when the individual is re-engaged with the ecologies and environment that are surrounding them. And the operative element here is that the sunlight basically comes down on the river itself and then reflects back up onto the bottom surface of the bridge. So the bridge is really an extracted fragment of the river itself, and it becomes the surface upon which you walk. So for me, I guess, in just very briefly in summary, I mean, I think science and physics, admittedly in a very rudimentary way, are certainly the place where I start work and start thinking about things, and certainly try to utilize, to my best abilities, a sense of observation and understanding, as I said, to sort of synthesize what one sees and how that can be re-engaged as a very active part of our day-to-day lives in architecture. So.
Is manager of the Office of Project Management at Argonne National Labs. She's responsible for envisioning the future of the laboratory campus and for making that vision a reality in a thoughtful and responsive way. Karen is a licensed architect and developed the Argonne Office of Project Management, which over the past 5 years has grown to a group of 90 professionals supporting a project portfolio that is currently worth more than $850 million. Karen, we may need Jamie to figure out light for your presentation here.
We're out of slides. That's all right.
But let me begin by asking a question, if I may, and we'll, I'm sure, get this figured out. Much of Argonne's research is aimed toward improving our environmental sustainability. How does the physical environment of Argonne inspire and facilitate that effort?
So I would love to be able to tell you that the Argonne physical environment has always been an inspiration to our researchers. Unfortunately, that's not true, and we're not there yet. Not that we're not trying to go there. While the Argonne site itself is naturally quite beautiful, we have forests, streams, prairies. The initial facilities that were constructed in the 50s and the 60s, these were never designed to be anything more than institutional. And Argonne's history of facility development has been one of intense spurts of construction followed followed by long periods of drought with no new development. And these intense periods have historically been focused on specific new programs. Our most recent of which, our Advanced Photon Source, was designed nearly 20 years ago, before we had any of the requirements and regulatory requirements that you see for sustainability. And even though we didn't have those requirements, it was intuitively sustainable. We did many of the things that today we're required to do, but they were being done then as well on that facility. Introduction of daylight, introduction of cool roofs, collaborative spaces, all the things that we know are the right things to do, and today we're required to do them. Once the Advanced Photon Source became occupied and was operational, of course, we even further recognized the influence of the built environment on our researchers. And so about 4 years ago, we initiated an aggressive campus modernization program that reaches into every corner of the site, our facilities, and our infrastructure. And when we started this modernization process, we developed a series of guiding principles, recognizing that our plans would need to be able to ebb and flow with the changing programmatic needs. But still, the guiding principles would help us to maintain forward momentum while aiding us in making informed, long-term decisions. That was 4 years ago. Today, we have 4 new research facilities in various stages of development. 2 of these buildings will start construction this year. Oh, I'm sorry, you can go on to the site plan. Next slide. Today we have 4 new research facilities in various stages of development, as I said, and 2 of these will be starting construction. And these are all replacement facilities. These are not new initiatives. Our focus, of course, is to improve the conditions for our long-standing, successful, stable programs, and hopefully our facilities will be successful in inspiring the research endeavors that take place in those facilities. Argonne has many distinguished researchers whose contributions to sustainability science and technology are recognized worldwide. However, to achieve eminence in sustainability at an institutional level requires integration across our own institutional boundaries. Next slide, please. The highlight of integration came about as we began designing some of the new facilities and socializing our efforts on site, bringing our research community and our facilities community together in the design process. On our energy sciences building shown here, we've had the most amazing integration at the macro scale as well as at the micro scale, from the building design and how it relates to the other buildings around it and how it works in the 200 area of our campus, right down to utilizing our chemistry division staff to perform analysis on new materials with recycled content and how they might be utilized in their laboratories. They do the analysis and make the selections of materials on their own. This has been an incredible experience for everybody, and it brings ownership to the facility for our teams. So even though the building design is now final and we have bid proposals in hand, as I said, we'll start construction soon, I'm certain that the discussions and strengths and weaknesses of emerging technologies such as LED lighting or anything else that becomes new and needed in their facilities, I'm sure our discussions are far from over. The integrated team has been able to develop collaborative spaces both inside and outside the facilities, and together we're planning and designing opportunities for inspiration, innovation, and ultimately excellence from our own physical environment at Argonne. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Jeffrey Schantz has over 25 years of experience designing landmark facilities for universities, research institutions, federal government agencies, biotechnology, and pharmaceutical clients all over the world. His expertise includes facilities for high containment biosafety, nanotechnology, academic medical centers, animal research facilities, material sciences, clean rooms, and teaching labs. Jeffrey is the Senior Vice President and Strategic Director worldwide for the HOK Science and Technology Group. He holds a BFA from the Massachusetts College of Art and a Master's of Architecture from MIT. So with the art and science there, you've been the lead partner in some of the most technologically advanced research facilities in the world. How do you advance the technological needs and culture of science but into the realm of humane architecture?
One of the reasons why architects like to hang around universities is because every time we do a presentation, it's a thesis defense. So this is going to be a combination of 5-minute Shakespeare and thesis defense. I'd like to connect a few dots here. I am one of these people who enjoys the History Channel as well as I do Nova, but because I hang around with people like you all the time, I'm constantly looking for connections between important events. And one of the events that I'd like to talk about a couple of events here and draw a few arcs through some scientific endeavor that's taken place in the last 50 years and architecture itself. Because the two things are so incredibly intertwined, not only in the culture that we live in, but our perception of the world and how we live in it. So the first story that I'd like to tell is the dawn of the molecular age, which is when Watson and Crick, who were in competition with Linus Pauling to discover what the structure of DNA were all working together. And Linus Pauling was an organic chemist who was working with people who were mostly like him. He was working primarily with chemists out in California, whereas Watson and Crick were working in an interdisciplinary team back in Cambridge in England. And in the Watson team, it included a biologist, Rosalind Franklin, shown there looking at her microscope, and a physicist, Maurice Wilkins, who ran their X-ray crystallography machine, which didn't exist prior to this particular endeavor. And he took that picture up there in the corner. And when he took it, he didn't know what it was, and he stuck it in his drawer for 9 weeks. And the reason why he stuck it in his drawer for 9 weeks was because he thought he found what he was looking for, and in reality what he did was he found the molecule, but he was looking at the end of it. And what was wrong with the calculations that Watson and Crick were doing at the time was I think they were off by like 12 degrees on their geometry, and once that was corrected by a mathematician, they built the molecule, and all of a sudden it came up, they knew what they were, and they went running down the hall screaming at each other. So the thing is that in this particular instance, the collaboration of minds in a multidisciplinary fashion was really what brought on the dawn of molecular biology and all of the benefits that come with it. And so now here we are in a society that has DNA, takes it for granted. We know we have genomics, we know we have proteomics and all these things that come with it. So how does this dial back to architecture? So the first great building that was built for this age, if you'll go to the next slide, as Steve was pointing out earlier, is Lucan. Lucan is the Rosetta Stone on the Sargasso Sea of architecture. Whenever you need a reference to tie things back in the modern world, Lucan is where we go. And one of the things that I like about this building is that it incorporates the one idea that has been perennial in science since the founding of institutes in Middle Europe in the 1200s, which is the idea that Gothic architecture was the pinnacle of science, the idea that you could make stone climb to the sky and fill the spaces in between with colored glass to illustrate your conception of the universe and inspire people to do great things is really a cathedral. And what Kahn did here was he built a cathedral, but it has no roof. And if you look at that view down towards the ocean, his altar is the Pacific Ocean, and the roof and the colored tiles are the sky. And so we come back almost immediately in the modern era, in the era of molecular biology, to the very foundation of what we consider to be architecture and science. And Kahn did it in a brilliant fashion by reversing the figured ground equation in what your eye sees. So when I go out to La Jolla and I see this building, it inspires me every time I do it. And the next inspiration, if you'll go to the next slide, came on this project, which is a building that we are doing in London for a group called the UKCMRI, which stands for the United Kingdom Centre for Medical Research and Innovation. And from the beginning of the project, we were told that what they wanted was a cathedral of science. And when they said that, it was music to our ears in a lot of different ways. And if you look at the entire floor plan, the organization of this building, it's 4 buildings in a cruciform. In the middle of the city, it's across the street from where the Eurostar comes in from Paris at St. Pancras Station. In front of it is the British Library, and across from it is King's Cross. And what we've done is we've taken the 4 most storied institutes, medical research institutes in the UK, and we're forcing them into a single building so that they can collaborate in an interdisciplinary world and move their therapies more quickly from bench to bedside. So the idea of the cathedral, again, as a touchstone came back. So the molecular era in its architectural idea is grounded in the same thing as Gothic architecture. And if you go to the next slide, you see now that our altar now is the end of our atrium, where our stained glass window would go, and we have people up in the galleries and down on the floor, and this is how the building will be organized, and it will affect the way that people in the building collaborate because they will be going to that every day. Okay. So now I'd like to trace another arc, if you'll go to the next slide. Now, this is a story of national purpose. Of course, having been born in 1959, I grew up with the space age, and it was one of the biggest effects on my psyche that I can remember. And one of the things that came out from this was it was really born of national purpose. The Russians launched Sputnik. Everybody was terrified, so we did a crash program to build a space program and go to the moon. And we went through various permutations of this with all of the successes and failures that come from trying to achieve a great scientific goal within a short period of time, in this case, a decade. Imagine what this must have looked like to the rest of mankind. You had a country that was saying, oh, we're going to go to the moon in a decade, when in all of human history, no one has ever even attempted this sort of thing. So we build rockets, we build the Mercury program, we build the Gemini program, we build the Apollo program, we get to the moon, we build a reusable vehicle to get us back and forth to a space station. But where we've arced to now is we've now closed the loop between astrology and biology because we're now into astrobiology. And if you look at the priorities that the Decadal Committee came up with for NASA, the mission that they want them to do is the sample return mission from Mars. And the sample return mission from Mars is astrobiology and paleobiology, to go out and find a sample of some organism from somewhere else in the universe, bring it back here and study it and figure out what it is. So how do you do that? What do you need to do that? You actually need, if you go to the next slide, you need buildings that are instruments. You need infrastructure. So if you look at the history of the space program, it is a history of architecture as infrastructure, because we had to build buildings that were designed to assemble rockets. If you go to the Kennedy Space Center and you go to the Vehicle Assembly Building, you will find that spaceflight is 90% plumbing. It's about moving fuel into a closed space, lighting it on fire, and controlling it before it all blows up and gets you into the upper atmosphere. And that infrastructure had to be created, but the same kind of infrastructure had to be created not only for that, but to create the satellites and other machines that we put on other planets, right? And then you also have to have the administrative infrastructure that goes with it. So the building that you see here is one that we recently built for Johnson Space Center, which was a replacement for their administration building. Go to the next slide. So when you really talk about making a building as an instrument, this is really an example of what it is. I've been working on the Mars programs now since about 2004 with Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and when we got the notice that we had our mission was given priority in that committee, all of a sudden we had to resurrect all of the stuff that we were doing and start piecing it all together. So the part that I'd been working on had to do with the sample return facility here on Earth. And now this whole effort has become internationalized, so we'll be building one of these facilities both in the United States and Europe. And the idea behind it is to create, if you've ever seen the movie The Andromeda Strain, is to create the vessel into which we will put these organisms once we bring them back here to Earth. So imagine what that means to the future of the planet should anything get out, if it was alive, or how we can study it and what it might mean to the future of mankind. So what this really is I am an architect, but I am working on a project that is actually building an instrument. And the instrument that we're going to build in which to do this science is actually a system of systems. So we're going to be taking technologies that are going to be created all over the place in different parts of the world by different people, scientists like yourselves, and we'll be integrating and assembling them into this single instrument that will be responsible for doing all the science for off-world astrobiology. Now, the most interesting thing that I find about this is I've been working on this for a long time. I will probably not get to build this building. And the reason why I will probably not get to build this building is because resources are scarce. Resources are scarce, especially in NASA, and we want to have as many people as possible work on these programs. So it is likely that somebody will have to pick up the ball from where I leave it off and carry it on from there, which I find to be an incredible and very honorable opportunity, because it adds to the content of human history that one person can pick up where another left off and then continue on for that discovery. Go to the next slide. The next arc I want to trace comes right down to my hometown. I grew up in Homedale, New Jersey. Homedale, New Jersey is the home of Bell Laboratories. And all of the folks who worked at Bell Laboratories were my neighbors, including a few people who won Nobel Prizes. And the thing that was very interesting about growing up next to Bell Labs was Bell Labs, just like the space program, just like the dawn of molecular biology, was really the place where communication science was really invented and really took place. It took place on a place that was called the Turkey Farm. It was a 400-acre area in the middle of Homedale that started out as a rotary switch manufacturing plant for AT&T. And over the years, it grew into this other thing. And in 1960, they hired Eero Saarinen to design for them a building to create the communications age in. And this was the building in which a lot of what we know as communications physics happened. And there were some great discoveries that went on here that are things that we take for granted. You know, things like the transistor, the laser, molecular beam epitaxy, photovoltaics, Unix operating systems, cell phones, CCDs, satellite communications, and radio astronomy all took place in this building. And it all took place in this building between 1960 and 1969. So in 10 years, this single research institution, which was one of the most productive entities ever created by mankind, in 10 years basically created the communications age. And one of the things that came out of the communications age was the integrated circuit and the solid state chip. So what we know as silicon chips right now, what we know that goes into computers, was invented here at Bell Laboratories by my neighbors. Now, how does this affect the architecture of things? How does this affect what we do in the physical world? Go to the next slide. In the 1960s, when they were doing this, a lot of it was being done in laboratories that looked like this. They're a little bit more Frankensteinian looking, but it was because the technology that was available at the time, remember, you're working in an age where the laser had not been invented yet. These guys were about to invent the laser, okay? And they were going to take it and turn it into a commercially viable product. So somebody had to do that work. And the building that it was done in, when this was designed to do all of those environmental conditions that we talk of, the performance about vibration and sound and acoustics and electrical power and all of those things had to be done in this building. But Eero Saarinen had a very clear vision for what the modern world looked like. And the modern world was organized, it was efficient, it was gleaming, it had glass, it had steel, it was bravado, it was all of these things. And he captured this into this facility, and the men and women who worked in this facility would go to work every single day knowing that they were inventing the future because the building told them that. And not only did it tell them that, but it helped them do it. Right? So this arc between the culture, the needs of society, what science does, and what architecture does for science is a very important arc in the history of the human species, but it's an important arc in what it is that we're going to do. So if you go to the next slide, this is a building that we just finished in Saudi Arabia. This was for the King of Saudi Arabia. It's the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. And I know a lot of you guys know about this because they've been here to try and recruit your people, and they've done a lot of that kind of stuff, and they've been handing out grants and all that kind of thing. But the interesting part about this building is it goes back to the same model as Bell Laboratories. This is an institute, and they have institutes within institutes that are designed to tackle specific problems. And when the king started this project, he hired a group to study what things that they needed in order to get off of oil. One of the most amazing meetings that we had during the progenesis of this project was when the Saudi oil minister told us that oil had come to an end, and they know it. And so this building is designed to be the engine that's going to get them off of oil and convert their economy into something else, but they're also trying to convert their culture. Because in KAUST, the religious police are not allowed. The cultural police are not allowed. Women can drive, women can dress in Western clothes. Now, they haven't gotten to the point of integrating them in terms of the education, but here is a leader whose form of government, rooted in the 14th century, has decided that science is the thing that will change his culture. So go to the last slide, and that brings me back here to the University of Chicago, where I want to connect all three of these arcs together. The building that we are doing for you, for the molecular engineering building, is the culmination of these three ideas. It's the culmination of the dawn of the molecular age, it's the culmination of the astrophysics age and what we do in astrobiology and what we do in astrophysics, and is the culmination of what we've discovered in communication sciences, because communication sciences is what gave us the physical matrix that we're going to use in building nanoscience and building new technologies that will be the next step in applying those new discoveries into very useful things that can help solve the big problems in society. And I have very high hopes for this building and this program, because from where I sit and in all of the things that we see around the world, we see this as a very significant event, we see it as a very powerful event, and we see it as our country's answer, because you guys are doing this, our country's answer to other countries that are trying to get into this field and dominate it. So with that, I'll stop talking and move it on to Rafael.
Thank you. Rafael Vinoly, born in Uruguay, raised in Argentina, and founded Rafael Vinoly Architects in New York in 1983. Rafael is highly regarded as an architect of imagination and rigor, with a proven capacity to create beloved civic, cultural, and institutional spaces. Rafael teaches widely and founded a training and research program within his firm. He has designs on every continent except Antarctica, I believe, which includes the Tokyo International Forum, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Janelia Farm Research Campus, Philadelphia's Kimmel Center for Performing Arts, and the University of Chicago's Booth School, and soon to be completed, catty corner from here, the new hospital pavilion for the university, among his many significant projects around the world. So Rafael, batting cleanup. You have an incredible...
I have a scientific question to ask. What time is it?
Well, when Lisa said 6 architects in 30 minutes, I thought, not going to happen.
Okay,
but-
so then, and before you ask your question, why don't we try to plan this thing a little bit such that we have the dialogue that we wanted to have?
Well, let me, we could do...
I mean,
we
I
could
know
open that up
I'm
if-
derailing your speech, but it seems completely appropriate. I think this is a full collection of images that if the kind operator just can go through as if it was a movie, we would just go through, and it ends with one interesting thing that is just all pure experience. I got into this deal simply because I felt that specialists didn't know much about it, and a little bit of intuition could actually help. We've been relatively successful. It's a large portfolio of work all over the place. Go. Go. 2 more things to complement what Jeff was saying before. And one picture at the end, which is this one, in which I'm going to say something in less than a minute. The first is that the one thing that I think that Jeff is right, that buildings are instruments. I think that in this particular realm, buildings ought to be tools, which is a little bit different than an instrument. An instrument is something that needs to be played. A tool is something that fulfills a function that really has a lot to do with the pace at which science, and particularly life sciences, are changing in this moment in time. So I was glad to see that, and I can go over issues like performance and the differentiation between what I think is the architectural culture as a subculture and the culture of science, which is a completely different thing. I don't think that we have anything in common. And that's a very important thing, because to me, what we do is completely remove from the capacity to see if it works or not. And what you do, you wouldn't be in your business if you weren't good. You're cleaned up off the plate in 2 minutes if your publication is wrong. We can publish the hell out of it, and nobody says anything as long as we have a lot of discourse. So for me, the thing here is that I know you're going to ask me whether I talk to scientists in a different way, but I don't talk to scientists in any way, because I think that your talking is a hell of a lot more important than mine. Just to finish, the one thing that gives some sort of kind of reflection on my attitude towards this particular field of architecture is one in which I think there is no specificity, there is no steel, there is no references, completely specific to the program, completely specific to the site and the culture of the place, and the place is you and your histories and your environment. I think there is one aspect to that which is a little bit more general, which is our capacity to transform something which effectively today has to be primarily absolutely unbelievably flexible and with the capacity to change. You know, what we call a building is essentially a waterproofing membrane, right? That's something that it gets pulled out, in and out, constantly by the reality of the work that happens in your spaces. Our technology is centuries behind that. I mean, you know, we keep talking and talking about it, but our buildings aren't yet really at the level of the tools that you produce. I can give you 25 examples. The only one that I think is important is one that, you know, gets me together with Steve in this venture, which is a project that you inherited and I basically tried to transform, which was the first institute for what ended up being calling regenerative medicine, which in short is stem cells research.
Politics.
In California during the Bush era. And I am an observer of these things from more than just my professional hat. And I figure that the selection of the site of this building had a lot to do with the fact that nobody really at the governmental level wanted to see stem cells. And so they put it essentially in a non-site. And this is the image at the top. And the way to plan it was exactly contrary to this idea of flexibility. Was you didn't do it, but your alma mater, or no, not your alma mater, but your group was actually completely convinced that this building had to be a tower, which is completely the opposite of what a flexible building should be, because, you know, you create all this stratification. It's like balkanizing the community. So what we did was to put the building following the topography, trying to get a glimpse of that wonderful view at the back. So from my point of view, the only way to measure performance, and we can measure energy performance, we can measure a lot of things. The only performance that we fail to measure is one that has to do with the capacity of the users to transform the building, to make it be something that accommodates your research ventures. And the second aspect of it is something which, you know, no accountant can actually quantify, which is happiness. I think that is a very important thing to go back to these buildings and ask people whether they're happy or not. And I think that that happiness has to do with something that it has absolutely zero to do with science, gladly, so we still can collect a fee, which is that we work with creating a sense of pride and a sense of enthusiasm and a sense of identity. And I think those things are in the preview, in the realm of architecture. But if architecture doesn't accommodate to what science as a human endeavor is today, we'll keep producing these things that last for the time of publication, a meeting like this, and then 30 seconds from now, you start demolishing internally. That's it.
Wow. So I have a whole slew of questions, but I don't think it's fair if I continue. So I'm going to open this up, and please, who would like to begin? Yes.
Oh, what was that?
Well, an argument made. So the picture that you showed of a really fundamental Salk Institute, but I think Hellman also showed. That's where Francis Crick finished his career.
Oh, yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yes, thank you. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
So what about, what about this question of measuring, I think your words were, how do you measure the capacity of users to transform a space? The kind of qualitative, the unmeasurable, should we really try and make the unmeasurable measurable in some way to be able to prove success of a building? Anybody?
Oh, I'll take that one.
right.
You know, it's funny when the project I showed you in London, when we started it, that we came to the U.S. and we came to visit buildings. We visited your buildings. We visited your buildings at UCSF because they identified places that they thought were really good. And when we were done, they came to me and they said, "Build us Janelia Farms."
Yeah, I lost the competition to you, by the way. And I had to say why I lost the competition, because that would be really interesting. We lost the competition because we didn't believe that there were 4 institutes.
Oh, that's interesting.
That packing 4 institutes around a cathedral wasn't the best way of forcing this level of interaction where the disciplinary boundaries in science really literally don't exist on a day-to-day basis. And we proposed something that was much more horizontal, much more integrated, but of course the man
You should have
won.
taken them to the building before you proposed.
I did take them to the building, but I was naive. I mean, I was just thought that probably they would know it.
But you know, so I'll tell you something. What was interesting about it when we took the tours was they were benchmarking. You know, they were looking at different things.
You see, I don't even know what benchmarking
Yeah,
is.
well, to answer Steve's question, because Steve was wondering about what's quantifiable, what's not quantifiable.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Uh-huh.
The folks who were involved with the project very much had an urban mindset. The urbanist mindset in the traditional British way.
From the welfare fund, right?
Absolutely, the folks.
Yeah,
who-
but these people shouldn't even be touching this subject because they know much less than we do. Imagine how little that is. I mean, you know, the scientists were not at all involved in this, which is another thing that if I can give you a sort of a proclamation, I think that is what you guys should do because you're completely underrepresented. One of these images that you saw here in the culture in general, and I always say you have terrible PR, right? But I mean, essentially, we have good PR, right?
Yeah,
I
we
mean, you
great,
have
great
good
PR. I agree.
So what I'm saying is that if you take a look at this building we're doing in Oxford, we did a very large master plan for Oxford University. We're building the Institute of Mathematics. If you talk to these guys invented everything, and they don't get a penny from anybody. I mean, you know, we need something like we're short 700,000 pounds or something like that. And if these people got tomorrow on some form of strike, I mean, the banking industry stops. I mean, everything goes down the pipes. Our friend Gates doesn't know where to go. I mean, you know, Nomura Securities couldn't actually trade. I mean, you know, and all of these things. I mean, it's not just the application of it. It's the unbelievable significance of the work of the scientific enterprise today. Now, I think that's an important thing because what you do is different than technology. And I think that that's where we probably mix or have some point of contact. I mean, we use your technologies, but the important thing, back to your question about the future of our country, is basically not to forget that basic science is the beginning of all of this. I mean, you know, and it seems to me that creating a much more visible position for basic sciences is something that requires not only your effort, but also everybody else's, because I think that from this university in particular has a phenomenal respect for that. And as you well warned us before coming here, we would be asked tough questions. And that's the reason why I think I'm perfectly willing to subject myself to the torture. So you should ask questions.
Did that answer your question?
Tough challenge out here.
It's that what we do cannot be measured. It's only measured such that the contractor can go and put the stuff in the floor.
I think things can be measured, and
Yeah,
they can
yeah.
be measured in a lot.
It's
in a
like
lot
the
of-
footfall.
Wait, no. Wait, hold on.
Yeah,
I'm
what?
not talking about empirical measurement.
Okay.
I'm talking about the measurement of the benefits of what comes to society. You know, if you look at the space program, the things that got spun off out of the space program that we take for granted every day, just think of something like Velcro, right? You know, you have Velcro. You have Velcro because we sent a man to the moon. Nobody might have invented Velcro if we hadn't done that. So the idea that we undertake these great scientific endeavors for the pure, investigative nature of it, or for national purpose, or for whatever it is that we do, it is in the nature of mankind to be inquisitive. We want to know what we are. We want to know where we came from. We want to know how things work.
How is that?
So are we taking-
I don't understand the point about measuring.
Or are we taking that same spirit into the buildings we design?
Well, one of the greatest
into
things
the
about
built
these guys
environment.
is that they have discovered that they can measure. Isn't that fabulous? I mean, you discover that you cannot measure, right? Isn't that kind of like, somebody told me that that's quantum physics, right? How about that? The whole culture is about measuring, and these people discover that you can measure. How about that? So imagine the level. I mean, I always imagine these meetings in which your brains are significantly larger than ours. You see? So it's like humongous heads in here. My mother was one of you, and that's the reason why I ended up like this. You follow me? Because, I was constantly envious, and I never got. But the truth is that the significance of the work you do is passed through a system of bureaucratic mechanisms that dilutes this thing into a number of things that put in front the idea of technology. I think that we all know how Bill Gates made his money. It was a mistake on the part of IBM, right?
Or a mistake on the part of Harvard.
Harvard too, but Harvard didn't see it. I mean, he offered it to IBM, and I was there because I'm older than you. So, and the key, a lot. And the key for that, if you were born in '59. So what I'm saying is that if you take if it wasn't for the people that were actually developing mathematical ideas about this thing would never have occurred, right? And these fellows in Oxford need $750,000, which is what he pisses off in a luncheon or something. I mean, it's just
We have a
unfair,
question in
isn't
the
it?
back.
Yeah. Hi, Derek Steinkamp, Argonne National Lab. I am a resident, hi everybody, of one of the newest buildings at Argonne, the Theory and Computing Sciences building, which for those of you who haven't seen it, I don't know if there's a slide with it, but I believe the architectural style of that is described as neo-brutalism. I believe that's the actual term, just to kind of give you...
Or just brutalism. No neo.
At any rate, I see a fellow of my co-building occupants here right now, but at any rate, some people like it, some people don't. I personally like it, but the fact of the matter is I'm sort of restricted to that building. My desk is there. I don't have an office. Dr. Isaacs, if you're listening, you could help me out there. That'd be great. I don't have an office. Regardless, I like my area. Some people don't, but I don't really have the latitude to move throughout the lab to some of the other workspaces. My phone is there. My computer's at the building. How do you see that sort of, maybe Karen, this is a question for you. How do you see that having an impact on the design of Argonne throughout the next couple of decades?
So TCS is an interesting project for us because it was one that the interaction between the community that would reside in the building wasn't necessarily as strong as what we do when we design buildings on campus. There's a nuance here of on campus and off campus for those who aren't familiar with it. And so the residents weren't as involved. If the question is about moving forward and being able to transition between facilities, that's exactly where we'd like to be. That's the sort of thing that when we develop these collaborative spaces, community rooms, lobbies, spaces where you can just go in, plug in, and, well, not necessarily plug in, sign on to the wireless, of course, but you don't have to be in your office. You can be in somebody else's corridor, their lobby, their space. I mean, it's all there. The buildings that we have now, of course, are not designed to be able to handle that. You can't even take a phone call in many of them. So as we move forward, that is something that we want to see. We want to see the interaction and the capability to move throughout the facilities. We're starting to take what used to be discipline-specific buildings and mixing them up, not just for sport, but so that things will happen. They do think it's for sport some days, but that's exactly where we'd like to see it.
Can I ask you a question? What building is that?
So the Theory and Computing Sciences building it was built for our new supercomputer. and it has a lot of very open space. It's a very new concept for a lot of people on site. They don't like to be in a studio. They want walls, doors, windows, and it's been a difficult transition for some people. Derek happens to like it, which is great. He needs to inspire his neighbors, but some people aren't really fond of that. So it's been a challenge.
Well, that's a typical dilemma, but you know, that's part of the flexibility challenge. I mean, you know, maybe through the education of people, you know, freeing themselves up from the notion of the private office, maybe you can achieve some of these things. But the furniture and the actual layout has to be something that it is accessible to the user to change it, because that's a part of the tool, I think. The other thing
It's the same way people judge an office building, you know, and
Sure.
you know, maybe in terms of what was said before, but what I found very interesting about this panel that because we all are architects, but we all doing so different work, and the way we all saw kind of our involvement or our interaction with the subject science, we interpreted it a totally different way. You know, I mean, no, you made that very clearly, and Jeffrey, I mean, because you built actually buildings which are kind of somehow
Don't say it too long.
They require they require a totally different approach, like than doing an office building or doing even that building which you refer to is just another building where people work, right? You know, so now they have to work in a big open space, and they rather like to be in a little cubicle. You know? So
But certainly
this has nothing to do with whether it's a building for science or a building for education or an office building or.
But the intellectual construct, the processes that we go through to design these types of buildings are very different than what we go through in other buildings. You know, it's kind of like, you know, Jamie, what we're doing here. You know, we've got, on the one hand, this building that on the inside has to operate on a very precise level from an engineering standpoint. You know, we need systems and materials that are very high performance. And then on the other hand, there's this desire for this aesthetic, and an aesthetic that not only talks about what it means to be in the building, but what it means to be on this campus, what it means to be in this university. And what I find the most interesting is that we started out in this idea of the Gothic architecture and everything around the campus, and we have this very layered, very transparent, very, you know, nuanced kind of enclosure for this building, which is very appropriate for the kind of things that go on inside, because the magic of what they're going to do inside of it is going to happen at a very small scale.
But see, for instance, that missile launch building, you know, the only thing was important to support all the systems and whatever necessary to hold this thing up and to get it off the ground and not make sure that the building blows away. And you know, and you know, and when I showed a double facade which had movable flaps, you know, that the air could come in, that's a problem I somehow created myself, and then I had to solve it. No, and that's what we architects always do. No, in buildings which don't have this really strong requirements. I always say we put ourselves in a box and we have to work ourselves out of it. No, we did this glass thing there, and then we had to make sure that it doesn't become, hopefully, a hot house and whatever, right? No, and that people feel comfortable.
Hopefully.
And somebody say, and somebody says, why did you do it that way? You know, wouldn't there be a simpler way to do it? Yes. But so. Sometimes we have to put ourselves in this position that we create a challenge, because the building itself doesn't often offer the challenge. And I remember in the interview when when we were kind of asked to present to present ways how we would think about the project could be solved, and there was a diagram given. There were 3.5 million books, and then you had to create a reading room in the conservation department, and you had to connect it to the building, and so I had made some sketches. I said, well, you can put this thing above the grade, and then you put the reading room below, or you put the reading room above, or the reading room next to it. And I said, no, I couldn't think that I could ever study with 3.5 million books over my head. So I said, why don't you put the books below grade and put a reading room above? And you said, that sounds like a idea. Why hasn't anybody else thought about it? And the facilities,
let the building on the University of Chicago campus without building a 50-foot deep hole. It just seems it's like I think they should make it mandatory. As soon as you start, you just build a 50-foot deep hole and then build a building on top of it. We're doing the same thing.
Well, but after that question, the facilities people said it's too expensive, and it turned out to be not more expensive. No, I wouldn't say it was a lot cheaper, but.
I have a question more on the applied side, I think probably more for Gary and Karen. So we've touched on a lot of sustainable features as people have been talking, but could you talk to us about what sustainable features have been the most challenging to apply to research facilities?
Well, to combine your question and his point, probably about 80-90% of our buildings are not really buildings for people. They're buildings. I mentioned that they're more like machines than buildings, because they're enclosures to provide access for parts and services to underground equipment. So as such, they aren't a building in the sense that they have an occupancy. The occupancy is the machine. So the challenge is that LEED guidelines and so on are designed for occupied buildings. And we have a problem, actually, that we're trying to figure out, is how to meet the spirit of the guidelines, because we can't, without occupancy, we're not indoor thermal comfort for the occupants is not an issue, daylight and views is not an issue. I mean, so many of the points, per se, are not issues for those kind of buildings. So we're struggling with how to do that, how the spirit of it and what we can do. So I think does that answer the question? It's the unique nature of the functionality of the buildings.
The landscape and the materials used in the process and how to...
Yes, the materials would become important, and sustainability of materials and life cycle and so on. But we can't really reach a LEED goal in the sense, because we can't do all the things that need to be done. But we can do some of the things. But then the fact that the buildings are, again, more like machines than occupiable spaces that we would traditionally think of as a building.
So the Argonne buildings are not quite so machine-oriented. It's a combination of people and highly technical equipment that have to come together, and the needs of the equipment must be met, the needs of the people must be met, and they're never the same. And yet everyone wants to be right near their laboratory, as close as possible, connected to it, and meeting these sustainability goals is incredibly difficult because of that. Meeting the air exchange requirements needed in the laboratories, in the clean rooms, dry rooms, anywhere else you have to do it, and still being able to accommodate the people who live right next to it is the challenge for us, both from expense and performance. And of course, money's always the leader.
It's not impossible, though.
No.
Yeah, we've done a number of projects, including the Kaus one you saw, that are LEED Platinum. But my big issue with the whole sustainability thing, especially as it relates to laboratories, is it's very easy to get a LEED plaque, but it's very difficult to actually change the energy equation in these buildings. We have some buildings that consume thousands of kilowatts. And how do you explain that away? I mean, there's a coal generating plant down the street that's burning up, 35 tons of coal an hour to keep your building fired up, right?
But it is beautiful.
And no matter how you slice it, no matter how many times you use recycled carpet or put triple glazed glass in the building, or, you know, put a chilled beam in it, you're still using a couple of thousand kilowatts, you know, a day. So, you know, I don't know how you change that particular equation, especially in the physical sciences, because the physical sciences are a lot of facts that are immutable, that need to be dealt with in order to make these things work. I think in the life sciences, we probably have a little bit more success in getting actual real improvement, right? Because the life sciences, you know, we are moving a lot of that stuff into closed systems instrumentation, for instance. You know, not a lot of stuff is done out on wet benches anymore. So because of that, you don't need as much ventilation. So we don't design laboratories at 12 air changes an hour anymore. Matter of fact, we don't even design them at 8. We're trying to design them now at 4 and 2. And we're trying to take all of those pieces that need to be, you know, isolated and ventilated and do those at a higher rate of ventilation. Now, when you're talking about clean rooms and other things like that, there's nothing you can do about it, but the one thing you can do in clean rooms is you can recirculate the air, which is one of the things that we do to remove the particulate. But when you're starting to deal with volatiles, it's a whole other thing. So, you know, whether we actually achieving something is very different than getting a plaque. Anybody can get a plaque.
Right.
Well, it depends on the type of building you do. No, there's only, and you alluded to that, like in the LEEDS system, that there's a small part which the architect can actually control. You know, I mean, we're doing 3 exchange buildings in China. The 80% of the load is all in the data rooms. So you could take the attitude that those 20%, no matter what I do, what I do on the facade, what I do, that doesn't make any difference, right? No, but that's actually what we can control, and that's what I call intelligent smart design. I mean, it's the shape of the building we create, it's what we put around the building, and depending whether it's a deep floor building or a smaller building like the ones we did in Europe, it has more effect what you do in the perimeter. In a deep floor building, it hardly has any effect. It's maybe 3 to 5% of what you use in energy consumption. And if you do the most sophisticated double wall,
electricity in this country,
and
right? I mean, the real issue for buildings, when it comes right down to it, is electricity.
Yeah.
It's the use of electricity, the amount that we consume, how we, using electricity for air conditioning to convert, to move the thermal mass that you need to get moved around in a building with electricity. If all we did was change that equation, you would really actually affect our energy future. But doing all of the other things that we do, those effects are very nominal, and they're more oriented towards reusability and recyclability in the environment, in the built environment.
Yeah.
But until you figure out a way that you can change the equation, and I'm going to pose this to you guys because you actually know how to do stuff like this, until you can figure out a way to really change the thermal equation in buildings and the electrical equation in buildings, you're not going to make big strides. And it'll take a long time until we get there. So I don't really know how that happens next. Right.
So maybe,
Yeah, right.
so maybe there's some ideas on how to do that, because
but that whole equation.
a big topic starting about last year after the Obama administration issued its last executive order on carbon footprint for federal facilities is, what do we do with those facilities, as you mentioned, that 80 to 90% of the energy used is electrical energy to power the machinery, the scientific equipment. Okay, so that poses a big problem for them, because if you're going to try to hit sustainability targets where you're reducing energy consumption at 25, 30%, you can't do it within building mechanical systems or the building envelopes. They're not consuming that anywhere near that percent to begin with. So for instance, at Argonne, we have at our advanced photon source facility, we're using approximately 20 megawatts continuously whenever we're running. Okay, of that 20 megawatts, and if you took those megawatts and multiplied it by the operating hours per year, the mechanical systems, the building heating and air conditioning are maybe 10 or 15% of the energy consumption. So what do you do? Okay, so what the problem for us is, and the problem we're struggling with, is that we take that electricity, and my joke is that we don't do any useful work at it. Yes. In other words, we're not taking that energy. We're not bending metal. We're not forming things. We're not drilling things. We're using it and we're turning it into low-grade waste heat. And the low-grade waste heat is pushing us to the limits of the thermodynamic cycles. And unless we can find a way to solve that problem and take that energy that we've used and turned it basically into waste heat and recycle it somehow, we're lost.
Well, didn't they, don't they only run the machine when the snow is melting because it's all hydropower, they don't have enough electricity?
No.
Sorry, you're lost relative to what?
The problem is that of the 20 megawatts that we're consuming at any given time, about 85 to 90% of it is being turned into heat.
Sure.
Okay? And that heat is at a temperature range between 70 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You can't really do much with it.
Yeah.
You can't convert it back into electricity easily.
No, I follow that part.
Okay.
I don't understand why you feel lost. You shouldn't feel. You shouldn't feel lost.
No,
it's the best use of energy. A B-2 bomber.
Right, and I agree with you. But I think we're working on taking technologies, multiple technologies, and combining them into hybrids that can work on the margins and start to reclaim some of that waste heat. And that's, I think, the real key to the computing facilities and to accelerators and light sources and facilities like that. And to, on a campus system, to look on a campus basis, look for synergies. Buildings that generate lots of waste heat can sit next to buildings that need lots of heat.
Sure.
Classic example is a chemistry lab, right? So take the waste heat from your computing facility and bring it to your chemistry lab and recycle it, like we're recycling paper and aluminum cans. But we don't see that happening too much. The emphasis on waste heat recovery seems to be in the high-grade areas for industrial processes, for steel plants, or someplace where they're creating heat, or power plants, where they're creating heat at the 200 to 300 degrees centigrade level.
You don't see that happening because you're underrepresented.
I agree. And that goes back to your point about having
You see?
scientists.
Because because you have too many architects around you. Because if you get,
Wait a minute.
somebody's gonna give you somebody's going to give you some spiel about the story about how buildings should relate to each other and the public perception, all that crap. It's all great, right? And then the same people that are telling you that try to make you be platinum or whatever the lead thing is, which I think is a hoax to start with, because nobody. So why don't you just calm down and do your work? That's all I'm saying.
So I'm gonna encourage this collaboration out in the hallway, because I know some people are.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious. This is the only thing. Architecture and science are two different cultures. Yeah. You have a culture of science, and we have an architectural subculture which talks and speaks and does things and create ideology and all the rest of it. You can't create ideology because you lose your job, right? If you do. You see, it has to compute, right? It has to compute. It has to make sense. All of these other people, no. Wait. Let me just finish this thing because I gotta run. All I'm saying is that this difference, until we actually lower our pretension and our sort of arrogance and understand the difference between a really hard thing from something which isn't that hard, which is what we do. We only have one thing in favor of us, which is the pure, simple dimension of talent. We can recombine. Everybody in this group is capable of recombining things, right? But just out of intuition, right? There is no way to verify any of that. You should be in charge of planning the campus if people are so concerned about the consumption of energy. That's it.
I would like to say that scientists are not underrepresented at Fermilab.
Okay.
No, I didn't say that. Maybe in your shop, Gary, maybe in your shop they're not underrepresented, quite frankly, because you don't have a shot at it, right? I mean, your buildings don't have people, have machines. I mean, what the heck, right? That is true. So, all I'm saying is that in the places in which you guys have to operate like human beings, what do we come up with social engineering? Mm-hmm. We're going to tell you how you should interact. I don't know if anybody knows the Whitehead Institute at MIT. You do?
Yeah.
What? It's the first guy that decided that people were going to have a coffee on the landing of a stair, right? Never, ever, ever in the life of the building anybody had a coffee on the landing of the stair.
That's not true. That's not
Nobody. Nobody. Yes, nobody.
Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Huh? That's a different thing. Are we done? Are we done? We're done.
What? 1 minute. This was truly spectacular. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody else did. I come to have fun myself, and I did. However, it's not over. The food for the mind perhaps is over, but there's more food outside. We have dessert, and you're welcome to come out, and maybe a little bit of discussion so you can have food for the mind. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Steve. Thank you to Lisa.